So I've been binge watching exotical content from different creators the past week. It's like I took a break from watching YouTube in general just because of work and life. And now that I'm back catching up, it's like, wow, so much is happening in this space. And I think the most relevant to me is the conversation around multiculturalism and how that can impact a black girl in life growing up, particularly from a monoracial perspective. I've often wondered, like, why, like, outside of being the shade of brown that isn't deemed too light or too dark. So in school, you're not being picked on for being a light skinned girl, and you're not being picked on for being a dark skinned girl. And my only observations were basically that. Like, my observations were not lived experiences until I reached adulthood. And after I reached adulthood, I could look back, unfortunately, on some of those childhood experiences and realize that actually there were instances where I was experiencing reverse colorism, but it was in the form of microaggressions. So I wouldn't have had the maturity or like the situational awareness to understand why certain things were happening as a child. And even into like my young adulthood, I didn't immediately understand that my my shade of brown was considered light enough to be treated poorly by, within the community, by women who were taught to hate themselves by their mothers and aunties and older female relatives. This particular video, like I said, was sparked by the multiculturalism conversation and just the idea of how cultured a person is, or the type of entertainment and influences that they're exposed to as children, how that can really help to sort of shield them from low self esteem. Because if you're focused on like art and reading and just having like childhood hobbies like jewelry making, playing with clay and learning how to like make pottery, and like you don't really have the mental space to think about, or just the adults around you are not even talking about complexion and who's darker and who's lighter, and it's just not a thing in your household. And that is such a blessing to grow up in a household that's anti-colorist, and you don't even really think about light skinned people being superior, or darker skinned people being inferior in any way, shape, or form. And so you enter the world not really focused on that, and not even focused so much on your own aesthetic because you're so busy doing things, like having interest outside of what you look like. And other people make your physical appearance a thing. Like, I honestly would have never considered myself light skinned. I would have never considered myself an exotical. I would have never even really considered myself oh so pretty, but for the microaggressions that you experience as an attractive woman. And then you get feedback from, I'm not a male-centered woman, but you get feedback from, men in your life who care about you, and they're not necessarily discussing your appearance, but they're explaining, like, don't worry about how those girls act, or even as an adult. Like, if she said that to you, she was jealous of you beforehand. Like, if she said that to you, or if that's all it took for her not to like you, she never liked you. She's just a jealous woman. Like, it has been like men in my life who have seen certain things happen, and say, like, it's not that you're stuck up. You're not. You're perfectly nice. And they're just jealous. They think you're stuck up because you're pretty. That's the issue. And so, shout out to black men, because I've had positive experiences with black men in my life, and I know that everybody's experience hasn't been the same in that way, but I'm not going to act like that has been my experience when it hasn't. Like, they've been great to me, and I thank God for that. And I do think, unfortunately, a lot of the negative experiences that I haven't had are deeply rooted in the fact that I have this really strong, almost like Southern Christian upbringing, because my mother is a Southern woman and my grandmothers are all Southern women. And I don't know how they managed to make it up out the South and not be colorist, or at least I'll say that for my mother's side. But I then again, my mother's side is full of golden brown women, or brown skinned women, who wouldn't have necessarily been treated terribly for their complexion. But then again, we also have, like, my sister is darker skinned, and we have darker skinned relatives as well. And I just grew up in an environment where it just wasn't a thing. Like, nobody was treated differently, or, remarks weren't made about their complexions. And so I really feel like, it's been said before, if you're a woman who struggles with her self esteem, you really need to figure out who taught you that. To quote Malcolm X, who taught you to hate yourself? And you will often find, unfortunately, that it was a maternal figure, like a really, like, a woman who had a strong influence in your upbringing. And then you also have to give her some grace and consider her upbringing as to who taught her to hate herself. But it is absolutely learned behavior. And that's great, because if you learned it, you can unlearn it. Thanks for listening.